works.
Recording is on.
Yeah, I have started recording.
All right. So let's begin. I was thinking just showing a little bit of FreeCAD for like 20 minutes or something, and then we talk. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Sure.
Then this is FreeCAD. The black aspect is because of my desktop theme. I can change that, maybe would be better. So it looks more like yeah, that might be better. Looks more like everybody will have. So this is basically FreeCAD, and when it starts, that's what you see. Just a little note for who never used FreeCAD and wants to download it. The best place basically you go to website, and then you have downloads for all the platforms. These are the stable versions, but I would advise everyone who wants to test it to go to development version, because basically the development version are usually very stable, and it's really hard that there is a bug or something and you really get stuff as we do them. And this is usually made by hand every week or so. So you just go there and grab your version, and then these Linux image you can just change one to the other. It's really easy to keep up with the most recent version that you have, and you really have much more than if you take the stable version. So I would definitely advise anyone wanting to have a look to try one of those development versions. So basically you install it, and that's what you get when you start it. And FreeCAD is actually it's a very generic 3D modeling application. So it's not made only for BIM, but for, like, it started basically a bit like CATIA, a generic 3D modeling application. So it's mainly used by mechanical engineers for 3D printing, etc. But being generic, it also fits perfectly with anything. So it's also a great platform for BIM, actually. And this is basically the most important control of FreeCAD. These are workbenches. And they are basically sets of tools for specific operations. Like part has this tool. I need to make a new document. Part has these tools like primitives and Boolean operations like union, subtraction, and that very simple stuff. And we have one, the draft is for 2D drafting, like lines and rectangles and that stuff. You have, just to show you part, this is a cube I just made. And everything in FreeCAD is parametric, means you take this cube here and you have here below all these properties, and I can change this on the fly. So basically that's FreeCAD. That's a generic parametric modeling platform. And you have this sketcher that's a bit also allows you to do 2D elements, but you can put constraints in it. For example, you draw this, and then you take this and you put a vertical constraint of like, let's say 8. And you can give this a name like height. And then you close, and then this object has a height here that you can change.
Hey, Yorik.
I don't know why it didn't work.
Yorik?
Yes.
Can you hear me or no? Oh.
Oh, I'm
Hey,
the right.
it's Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi. When you're applying the, let's say you named a variable height, right? Can you apply that height to another edge, right? Can you apply that name to another edge?
Yeah.
You can. Okay. Cool.
Yes, you can. Basically, this is all, you design this all the way you want. For example, let's say something else here. You see that I didn't do it vertically, but you can change this and add a verticality constraint, and then do things like this and put an horizontal distance here of 10, and then I can give this a name. And then I have spacing here that I can change. But of course, it calculates, I should have locked this as well, so it doesn't change. So this sketcher is really one of the most powerful parts of FreeCAD. And then it recalculates everything, but I could have locked one point also, so make sure this rectangle stays in position. It's really flexible. You can, inside this sketcher, shit. For some reason it crashed. Doesn't happen that much. I'm not sure what I was doing. Anyway, that's the sketcher. And yeah, and the one you guys will be most interested in is the BIM workbench, which has BIM tools. And the BIM workbench doesn't come by default in FreeCAD, so you have to install it yourself, which is pretty easy. We now have a add-on manager, which takes add-on from the internet. This is all the list of plugins we have now. These are not developed by FreeCAD. It's like people developing this outside, but we have these curated lists of them that we keep, like the good ones that are more or less in shape to be used, etc. And there is quite a growing collection actually. And it's interesting that the ecosystem around FreeCAD is getting really big now, and lots of activity happening there. And so those guys who develop these things don't really depend on FreeCAD to do anything for them. They just develop their stuff, and the manager sees where there are updates available, etc. So this BIM workbench is where you install the BIM workbench, and that's it. You click on it. So to install one, you just take one and install and downloads, and that's it. It's really pretty easy, but I won't restart now. And so the BIM workbench, basically, it has 2D drafting tools, which are basically the same that you find in the draft workbench, plus Sketcher, and then 3D tools. Basically, these are like the usual ways to organize your project. This is really IFC language. In IFC files, you always have a project, always have a site, always have a building and levels inside. But you really don't need to use all this in FreeCAD, but they are there if you want to follow the IFC, the way IFC files are made. And then all these tools that you basically know from other BIM applications. The wall is a very straightforward tool to use. basically this wall always has a baseline that you can edit that way. There are now tools. I think the draft edit tools now edit this wall directly, but you can also make these walls. For example, I could draw myself something like that, and then press a wall tool, and you get a wall. You can always do that. For example, you could take go back in our part workbench and make a cube, and I will give it like 2 meters. That's another interesting thing. Let's say 20 centimeter weight, height, I would say 3 meters. That's another interesting thing in FreeCAD, that you can mix units. I could give here distance in feet, like 10 feet. And since my unit currently is centimeters, everything here appears in centimeters. But where's my cube? So this got instantly translated into centimeters, but you can still work with any unit you want. And if I change here into feet, everything appears in feet here without changing anything in the model. The model is always in the same in real world units, so you can just really mix units and work in any style you want, and mix everything as you want. Now this cube, for example, I can make a wall out of it, and this wall, you see, it still has its cube inside, but the advantage is that it has now IFC properties. I could change the IFC type or other IFC related properties. Basically, all these BIM tools here, they're all very simple objects. They do basically same kind of things, but they all have IFC properties. For example, let's make a column, and it took the default that was working with, but you have lots of options here. We have a couple of presets already, and there are more plugins that give you more stuff like that. But basically, the big advantage that when you use these tools, they all have these IFC properties. So they have a type, they have all the classical IFC properties. And if you change this, for example, I would change this to, let's say, wall. And you see that its IFC attributes change to the ones that go together with a wall. Let's go back to the column. So basically, this all works a little bit like you would be used to in any other BIM application. Windows and doors work basically the same thing, the same way. This grid here in FreeCAD is our work plane, and you can change this to anything. Take a face and set the work plane to that face. And so, for example, if I want to insert a window here in this wall, I would set my work plane here to be easier. Now I place a door here. Yeah, here, for example. And then I have my door here. And basically, this door is here, it's inside the wall, so it's bound to the wall, but I could like unbind it. Basically, doors and windows have a property. Where is it? Hosts here. That say that tells which wall it's part of. So you could just remove that easily. For example, I would take this and say it's part of another one, or remove it completely. What else? Yes, organizing. But basically, you don't need like in Revit or in other BIM applications where you always draw inside a level. And in FreeCAD, you don't really need to do that. This is your 3D space. I will put that back to ground floor. Basically, this is your 3D space, and you put things inside it the way you want. I could, for example, I would build a wall above. I could just move this one, for example. I will put my work plane vertically and take this wall and move it from here to there. That's basically how you model. Now you can do more interesting things. For example, I could use levels. I will make one level here and another a little bit above. This will be our ground floor, and this would be our first floor or upper floor. And I would move my upper floor. Nope. From here to here. This one, and then I have 2 floors here, and I could like put all this in the ground floor, and this one that I hid in the upper floor. And then I begin to have a little bit like how it works in other BIM applications. All these BIM objects have this property that says if they can move with their host or not. If I set this to true, and then I move my upper floor, I can move it with the move tool, or I can just change its placement in its position from 300 to 400. And you see that everything that's inside moves together. So you're not forced really to use the way it works in other BIM applications, but you can if you want it. It's never like forced. You have other ways to group things. For example, I could move this all out, remove my 2 floors, and decide to work with groups. So we also have simple groups that are basically folders. And then inside, I could put more groups like walls, and then put all my this knot and this one inside here, and add another group, and put this.
So Yorik, when
Yes.
you had the wall hosted to a level, right? You moved the level, but now you moved it to a group.
Yeah.
Is it still associated with a level anymore, or did you break that?
No, I just removed them from the levels.
Okay, so if you move a level now, the wall won't move because it's not associated.
This is not a level anymore. These groups are just like folders in your Explorer, and they don't do anything with their content. But I could restore this easily. Like you see that I removed the levels now, and I could put it back. And this would be my new ground floor and move these two guys inside it. Now this is not used anymore. I removed this, and now I got back to the old behavior. So it's really flexible. You organize this thing just the way you want, and this is really something I like, that you don't have a predefined structure of your model. You just do it the way it works best for you. And these levels are not only levels; they are just any group of objects that you want. So you could use this not only to represent levels, which is the most usual way we use them, but also to do stuff like components, reusable component. They are clonable as well. All these elements, we don't have in FreeCAD the concept of family like you have in Revit. What you do is determine that you have one element like this, and you just clone it. Not sure why nothing moved. I have here made a clone of my wall, and they are basically, this one is a copy of this one. And if I change this one, I have to change the cube inside. Let's say change this to 300, and you see the second one is a clone of the first one. So you can achieve the same system as with families. Like you have one element that defines something, and you have all those elements that take the same settings, and you can do that very differently. For example, see this wall. If I make a clone of it, this here, it just copies the shape of the first one. But I could do that differently. You remember that it's based on this line. Now, if instead of cloning my wall, I would make another one based on the same line. Then I can have two different walls. For example, let's say the second one has different thickness, but they are both based on the same baseline. So if I change the baseline to this, you see that this one was the original one. This one is another wall using the same baseline as this one, and this third one is a clone of the first one. So you really have something much more powerful than just families, that you really can decide what you take from the model. And so you could have something like a base scheme of your plan, for example, and have several walls that pick several lines of that wall. And so it's a bit more complex, but it's also way more powerful than just a family system. You can really tailor how these things work.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
So this structure that you're kind of making here, is this structure when you export it out in IFC retained or
Yes.
not necessarily? Okay. So do you have to make a conscious effort then to structure something in line with how IFC is kind of structured?
Yes or no? Let me show you. Let me put this wall here. And you see this here, I have a structure that's really not very well organized. I have this ground floor, this upper floor, which is a group, and the ground floor is a real floor, and I have three walls that are not inside any of them. I could clean this up to make it like a right IFC structure, or not. I can just take all this and export this, add this to IFC. And then let's open it. And that's how it goes out to IFC. And you see that basically when you export, it creates a default project. This is mandatory in IFC. And a default building. This is also mandatory. You need to have at least one. You cannot have your object directly inside the project. You need to have one container. And you see our ground floor here. And basically, because this is my default in FreeCAD preference, it put everything inside the default floor because I saved that in my preference here. If you go to preference, import, export, and IFC export, there are several options to do what to do with that. Does it need to create the default groups or not, etc. To help you with that, but I mean, you could. Let's try to do it the right way. We would create a project, then we would create a site, put the site inside the project, then create a building. Okay. Okay, all right. He wants me to select what will go in the building. That's also something I put in my preference, and then I put my building in the site. And then I should really move that out and remove this. And let's say I move those three guys out. So if I don't consider these four ones, now I have this here is a logical, correct IFC structure. But honestly, this is more, if you look at how IFC files work, this is more like the common way to do it. That's how Revit does it. That's how everybody does it. But it's not like that in the IFC documentation. They just say you need one project and you need one building structure. So we didn't see why we should just like do like everybody else if it's not mandatory. But you can turn the appropriate options on here, and it would recreate all these things for you. So you really don't need to care about it. Let's say if you get used to IFC and you can really make things the way you want. But you can automate that easily as well.
Do you have any like example files out there in GitHub that have projects with this kind of hierarchy pretty established? It'd be kind of interesting to review them just to kind of get a sense of how you typically organize stuff.
Yeah, one of mine, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and not necessarily now, but if you want to. But I'm just saying for others to just.
Let's see this one. This one is from the video tutorial I've been doing some time ago, and that's a good example actually. It's the Barcelona pavilion by Mies van der Rohe, and I've been using it to make a series of video tutorials. And basically, if you look at it, how I did it, I have this construction geometry. Let me turn everything out. Basically, this just has the terrain outline. I have this site here where I did this, and if you look at how this is done, I started making this after I've actually started modeling the building. So this guy. After I finished it, I made an outline basically by drawing on top of it to have like something I wanted to remove from the terrain. And then made a next version of it. This surface is made with the 4 outlines here. And then there's just one subtraction of one minus the other. And then you get the terrain. That's how I built it. And I didn't put the object inside the terrain because I didn't want to. I just wanted to keep the terrain outside of my building structure. But I could just put that floor inside the site as well. Put a building and then the floor. And if you look at how it's here, I just made one level. And inside, it's all groups. And one for annotations. Let me turn then the off and turn back on. This was just an example to show how to put annotations. The footings. There was that bench. I just made a group for it. The floor, the walls, the doors, all the windows, columns, and the roof slabs. And you can just like organize the thing as you wish. Actually, these groups go to IFC as well. You don't see them here in the IFC++ application because this application doesn't show groups, but they are there. If you open this in any application that supports group, they will still show back. For example, I can open my IFC back in FreeCAD, and you see that the groups are all there. It's imported as simple shapes because also it's in my preferences. But you can pretty much get it back the way it was when you export it. So you cannot really have a perfect round trip in FreeCAD like you in any. I don't think you can get that in any application at the moment. But I think we can get really, really close in FreeCAD and get back something from your IFC file that's pretty much exactly how you exported it.
Yorik, did it? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There. Oh, were you able to, upon your import, recreate your clones, or to some degree, through the mapped item?
Let me change my preference and try it. Yes, this is import arc objects are parametric arch objects. That's what I wanted. And now, if I open my IFC file. Hopefully I get it exactly how it was. Visually it is. Oh, of course, there is another option that something I just added recently because nobody used this whole structure of project, site and story. So I added this option where you can just skip all of it and replace it by group. Okay, and now let's open again. Yeah, and you see that it's come back. It came back exactly how I exported it, and you see that the clones are still clones. They have this icon here. So that's
awesome.
This is a clone of, I don't remember which one. This one. And if I change, oh, of course I lost my parametric cube inside. This is because there is no parametric cube in IFC. But that's something like we're kind of working on trying to. That's something I've really been thinking a lot recently. How to make objects that are not parametric anymore in the IFC file somehow parametric again. Let's say at the moment my base cube inside it is lost, and so I cannot edit anymore. But another one like this one, which was not made by with a cube. No, this one is not editable anymore either. But we have several tools, like there's this tool here in the Bing Workbench tool, re-extrude. That's it. And now I've turned this editable again. And then, so we begin to have a couple of tools to make something that is not editable anymore, to turn it back to something editable. And that's still like a work in progress, but let's say it's more than FreeCAD. It's a generic problem with things that you import from IFC, that they lose their parametric stuff. And then, for example, what this tool does in FreeCAD is that, let's say you have this wall that's not editable anymore, but you can just select a face and press this re-extrude. Okay, this one didn't work for some reason, but for example, this one is already an extrusion. But let's take this one. And I think this one worked.
Do you know, like in Inkscape, the SVG file is basically the native file, and it's also obviously a standard in itself. Has there been any discussion, like with FreeCAD, or you've thought that actually have IFC itself be the native file for like FreeCAD? Well, obviously the BIM part of it. Is that kind of even a possibility, or would that make sense?
Yes, you mean you have the standard file that everybody can read, and you insert in it certain properties that your application can read and recognize.
Right.
Yes, yes, that's a really definitely interesting way to do it, and definitely that's doable with IFC. The problem would be that only your application would know that. But
at this point, like, who cares, right?
Yes,
you know, it's like, it's out there. Here's the structure.
Yes,
and like it only FreeCAD can use it, but if you want to, here's the structure, right?
Yes, yeah. And also this is open source, and Molt is here with the Blender Beam, and we could devise something between us, and at least we would be two applications being able to do that. And so there is lots of possible stuff to start with. But yes, that definitely is the way to bypass the system. And you could have this wall here and say somewhere that what is its baseline and how it needs to be editable.
Right.
And that would be really not much work, and would get back totally readable and editable the same way that it was. I did some experiment with this some time ago, which was this. In the preference here in IFC export, where was it? This guy here, export full FreeCAD parametric model. If you do that, and I will just export one wall because it's lengthy, just to show you. And let's say take this wall, and I would export it to IFC. And if you open it here, it's just a normal wall, like all applications would just see a normal wall. But if you open with the text editor, you will see all these properties here. all the properties of the FreeCAD object. Like if you look at this wall here, all this list of properties here is all that you see inside the IFC file. And so if now I open it back, I will open my wall here in FreeCAD. Of course, it added the stuff. No, there is some error going on. It's still not, let's say I never used it much further than just to experiment. But the idea is that you would get back everything exactly like it was in FreeCAD. But let's say it was never really interesting for anyone outside just testing, so I didn't go much further with it. But that's exactly that concept. So we could.
What in your opinion, what do you think is like the the lowest hanging fruit in terms of round tripping something, right? If you're like to say, hey, we're working with another platform, we're gonna start with X, Y, and Z. What do you feel that would be?
Well, I don't know. Maybe just
because obviously, the whole IFC structure is very complicated, and how a window gets hosted in the wall and all this. It's like, it would take decades or whatever years in order to round trip all that. But if you were to pick one thing, okay, we're going to start with this one thing, and we'll see some return on it really quickly. What do you think that would be?
I would say making something like that work between, for example, FreeCAD and Blender, because all of us are here. So it would be like easy to get everybody in. And let's say, let's agree on some, let's agree that a wall needs, I don't know, a baseline and like to have this is something, for example, very simple. That's not possible easily in IFC, is to have a baseline of your wall and to tie the footprint of your wall to that baseline. And we could do that easily with like a very simple property like this. And if we would have like two applications that read that, that's enough of a starting point, I would say. So it would be maybe just a matter of building a kind of table of common properties that we think are missing in IFC, and that we could just implement them. Like, what do we need? Like, what do we think that a wall would need? Something like that.
So, I'm sorry I'm asking so many questions, but obviously this interests me. So I guess, Dion, are you on? I want to get a conversation going. I want to get a conversation going. Okay, good. I really want to get a conversation going here to develop, I don't know, a game plan here. And tell me if I'm manipulating the conversation, I'll just shut up. But I feel like we should work together to develop some kind of base round tripping logic, and obviously make it as simple as possible. Like IFC extrude area solid. That's it. We're all going to decide this is how we do it, and we're not going to vary from that. And just start there. If we could just do like IFC extruded area solid, and Yorik, you might want to chime in on this too, but with the opening detail workflows, by just round tripping an extruded solid, I think we could do a lot. There was a lot of mileage we could get out of just that. Would you agree, Yorik?
Yes, definitely. And basically, IFC has a lot of junk that we don't really need, and that we could have very simple IFC files where we should be able to define our own stuff and not necessarily follow the hundreds of rules that are not really rules because they are not even in the IFC definitions, but that's like there are de facto default that every BIM app out there uses, and make a couple of rules. And if you look at these things, if you like, you would strip out all the FreeCAD prefix that I added here, and like define what we need. And basically the format allows it, that you just can add any kind of properties to any object. That's totally valid, and so we could really take advantage of that. And if you think what makes actually a file format parametric, it's nothing else than the ability to store custom property for objects, and that we have in IFC. And then the rest is the job of the application to do something with those properties, recreate the object correctly, etc. So we could really imagine something like our own formatting of how these things should happen. And all the tools are there. There is no need to modify the IFC file format or anything. There is no need to ask for permission to anybody. Just a matter of like, let's say our objects are very simple extrusions for the general public, for the other BIM applications, but inside they would have all their properties that we need for all the applications that are able to read them.
So Dion, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, the extruded area solid is completely my fault. I haven't worked out how to make that a good round trip yet. And that's simply because Blender is a polygonal-based modeling package, which doesn't enforce the sort of strict extrusion modeling styles that other BIM applications do. But that's solvable, and definitely for very simple walls, which have a baseline or a base profile. That's definitely something I can work on. So just getting walls to go between FreeCAD and Blender would be great. Sorry, I just noticed one more thing. Duncan and Raphael have raised their hands, so if you want to speak, please do. You just have to press the unmute button in the middle of your screen.
Sorry, Dimitri here. I also want to pitch in something about this. I really like where the conversation is going. It's very fruitful, but I think it's also important to actually step back a little bit and think about all the different use cases and what specific use case would be solving with this return. Would it be all use cases? For example, is it more on the visualization side? Is it on the BIM side? Is it on the more straightforward BIM side? Is it an opening? Is it just a, do you know what I mean? Is it like a beginning of something, which I really like? That's
I think
probably
it's
not going to solve everything, but maybe some, like a test, I guess.
I actually think it should come out of just hacking away at something, and you have a certain project, right? We're trying to do X, and we have FreeCAD and we have Blender, and we're just going to round trip and work on this thing. It's an actual project. Instead of doing it a priori, where we're trying to establish this is the workflow. Okay, we have to address everything X, Y, and Z as we go. I think we should just, in the trenches, we have a project, actually paying projects, that we work out these kinks as we go. We've kind of did that with Yorik on opening detail. I was working in Revit, he was working in FreeCAD, and we didn't have everything established right from the beginning. We were hashing it out as we were going, is that we were round tripping our content with simple extrusions. We were round tripping it. Okay, this doesn't work. Okay, let's address this. And it was based around a specific project. It wasn't a hypothetical project, it was a specific project. So what I would recommend is actually hash this stuff out on a real project, right? Not something that's just hypothetical, because building smart is hypothetical workflows. They're hypothetical. They're not entrenched in workflow, like project workflow. And I think that's the beautiful part, is you could actually demonstrate publicly, here's a real project, and we're using Blender and we're using FreeCAD and we're exchanging and we're working it out as we go, right? You know, I'm not a programmer, I'm not a standards technician, but I'm pretty tech savvy, and I've been following this for years and years and years, is that, you know, really robust standards, I think, come out of workflow in the trenches, right? Is that not necessarily something that you come up with and this is how it should work on a very high level, right? It's like hash it out as you go. That's my opinion, and I just wanted to put it out there.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
totally agree.
I just thought, I don't know if this is going to be in this session or not, but it would be personally for me, and maybe for everybody else in these chats and meets, to introduce each other. Maybe you guys have done this in a previous meetup or not, but it would be really interesting why everybody's here, really. You know, what interests you about open source and architecture and BIM?
Yeah, actually, that's a good one. Should we do a quick introductions because there's a lot of new faces here compared to the previous meeting. So, would you like to start, Dimitar?
Yeah, sure. I'm Dimitar, and I have this open source interest since the first time I used Blender in 2007, and I'm an architect. I work in London. I've been using Blender professionally. Been lucky enough to use Blender professionally constantly. The type of projects that I work in tend to be a little bit less standard, more complex. I tend to use Grasshopper and Blender actually in my workflow almost daily. And I have dabbled professionally with FreeCAD as well. Yorik and the rest of the guys have been very supportive in the forums, and even pushing some features out, which is great. And the more I think, probably all of us, about this whole software situation, about especially around BIM within the architecture and construction community, the more absurd it sounds. And I think nothing demonstrates that better than the current situation, where a lot of, the workflow is going to go down. Well, firms are going to reduce their sizes, and they won't have enough money to provide licenses for everybody. So what happens now if you go, you have a new project and you want to reference an old project, but all of a sudden you don't have the money to license, to open that project. It's your files. And I find that absolutely absurd. And yeah, I've been looking around different ways, even had many conversations with people about how this could be, maybe even starting a new software. I don't know. But then I stumbled onto FreeCAD, which is something I played quite a few times, and I realized it actually, it's a very robust base that could be expanded significantly to provide pretty much everything that I believe would be needed for the types of offices that I would work in, which, if they work with fairly complex workflows. So if that could be handled in that kind of office, it would probably be able to handle it in a lot of other situations. Sorry, that was a long intro.
Who's next?
I can introduce myself. My name is Franks. I'm a structural engineer in training in Canada. I'm here living in Canada since 2017, and I came from Brazil. I noticed that Yorik has a IRPF folder, IRPF 2020 folder, and it reminds me of my tax files when I was living in Brazil. So I guess you are in Brazil, right, Yorik?
I actually moved back to Belgium now 3 months ago.
Good.
I'm in Belgium now. But
Good.
I still have a foot there.
Sorry?
I still have a foot there.
Oh yeah, that's a good place.
Yeah.
anyways, that's it. My interest in open source software comes from since I was young, using Linux, and I usually nowadays, of course, I need to use in my workflow, mostly structural engineering. I need to use more closed source software, but I would be interested in how FreeCAD, if it does, how FreeCAD interfaces with Salome Mecha and Code Aster.
This is not really my area, but I don't think there is really any direct integration, like a plugin that would make both dialogue. But basically, they are both based on the same software stack, which is Open Cascade.
Okay.
So let's say both softwares speak the same language. So you can always export anything you do with FreeCAD as BREP format, which is Open Cascade native format, and that would open exactly the same in Salome.
Sorry, just jumping in here, Yorik. There's a few use cases being thrown around here. There's the Code Aster one we just mentioned, and Ryan has some use cases on round-tripping extruded area solids, which actually are very, very valid. I've seen Ryan's workflow. I want to quickly address the Code Aster one.
Right.
Ioannis, who's on this call, is he still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Because he's programmed IFC to Code Aster. Maybe you can talk about that, which solves that one.
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, what's Code
I
Aster?
understand very well the question.
So sorry, I'm just Yorik, can you stop sharing the screen, because I think that there is
All right. Yes.
some kind of let's say maybe.
How do you do that here?
Okay, I don't know, maybe.
Hear me?
Okay, I think that now it's better, I think. So yeah, we have done, let's say, some work with on Code Aster. Let's say I am an experienced user in Code Aster. So we are working on, let's say, some scripts or a workflow to start, let's say, from an IFC, structural IFC, and to have, let's say, the scripts to do the mesh and the analysis. But for now, let's say that we are focusing on the structural elements, so beams and cells. So we are not yet, let's say, on 3D elements. So I don't know. This is, let's say, what we are doing now. But I guess also, as Yorik said, from FreeCAD, I think that you can export, let's say, also 3D if you want, and import. I'm not sure about the OCC format that you said, Yorik, but I mean, I know that in Salome Mecha there are some formats like STEP or BREP, EDGES, STL, this kind of stuff. I'm not sure what other format can be.
So what I guess what I was trying to say is that there are quite a few use cases. So Dimitar, I wouldn't really worry about use cases, because in general, when we're building stuff, we're actually doing it to solve an actual problem. I'm sure when Yorik builds stuff, it's because he needs it for a project or he needs it to help Ryan out. And when I build stuff on Blender as well, I'm doing it to solve real use cases, just real problems I need to solve to get project work done. And we are actually using it on commercial projects. And same with Ioannis, who built the integration between IFC and Code Aster. So there's quite a few avenues here, and they kind of have a rhythm of their own. for example, I collaborated with Ionis at the beginning to allow structural element export out of Blender into IFC, but now I've taken a break from that to focus on other use cases. But I'm sure it's definitely on my to-do list to return on it. So I think there is a lot of really promising work being done to solve real problems. But if Dimitar, if you have a use case that you're trying to solve, and one of us are well positioned to solve it, then please bring it up.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, my use cases were mostly how to plug in an open BIM workflow within Revit, because that's what everybody uses. I've been with and we all know Revit. Well, maybe some of us do, but it's the elephant in the room. Unfortunately for everybody, it's very difficult to plug into. It's got its own weird things happening, I think, even with FreeCAD. But I typically work on projects with advanced geometry, and that's where my specific interest lies, of how to get a better workflow for producing advanced geometry, which the history in FreeCAD is very useful for that matter, and plugging it in. By all means, if that could work between Blender and FreeCAD, that would be even better. At the moment, I use Blender just as a dummy sort of, not dummy, but not BIM-oriented concept design tool. And then I further develop my projects into Grasshopper, into Rhino.
By the way, Ioannis, have you got the chat open? Because there's a few people in the chat channel as well, so feel free to respond to those as well.
Okay, no, I didn't see. Yes.
But anyways, maybe we can have like a thread or something running on the discussion software about all these use cases, because it's really interesting to see all the other ways that people are thinking of using all these tools together.
For sure. I guess I have a question for Dion and Yorik, and who's the gentleman working on Aster? I'm sorry.
I am Ioannis.
Giannis. Okay, Giannis.
Yeah.
Have you guys, when you're kind of developing your software and trying to develop workflows to push out your content from your platform or to another platform via IFC, have you ran into problems where, the IFC schema doesn't allow me to do X, Y, and Z, the thing I want to do? And do you ever get to that point where it's just like, well, I guess I can't do that because the schema doesn't support that, and you just stop kind of that pursuit, stop that direction? I guess I ask the question because I often feel, I hear this conversation a lot, is like, oh, the IFC schema doesn't do this and doesn't do that. Why not, if you're trying to exchange between FreeCAD and Blender or Aster or whatever, why not just hack the IFC schema to make it work, right? That's one thing I don't quite understand, is that, I feel like we shouldn't have to ask permission in order to make something work, right? It might not be the IF schema that Building Smart puts its blessing on, but it's worked for the workflow that you're trying to hash out at the immediate time. And there's only two people at these very, early days. There's only a handful of people that work on this stuff anyway. So it's like, we got two people that were pushing work back and forth. And if we could only push this part of the content back, but the IFC doesn't accommodate, why not change the IFC schema to accommodate it? That's, I guess, why? That's my question to, I guess, Yorik, my question to Dion, my question to Giannis, is that why not bastardize the schema to make it work for your workflow? And it might not be pretty, but the more it actually teases itself out, the more commonplace and more maybe accepted it will be in the end. So I know that's kind of controversial, but I asked that question, like, don't let the schema stop you, I guess.
If I can answer, at least for the structural, let's say that, first of all, I am kind of new, let's say, on this in the IFC, so I'm still kind of exploring.
Well, that's another thing. Everybody's new at the IFC, right? There's only 5 experts in the world, right? And you're not going to be an expert. Everybody's Yorik, he's new. Dion, he's new. You're new. You're not going to get it. You know, you're not going to be an expert.
Yeah, I see your point, but let's say I am very, very fresh, let's say, and for the structural, I had some doubts. Let's say that maybe there were some limitations, and I was kind of disappointed. Now I think that for now, at least, the limitations are not there from my side. At least regarding, let's say, 1D elements and planar elements, because let's say in a structural analysis, you need, let's say, what we call analytical geometry. So you will not, let's say, use the 3D geometry. You will use some analytical mathematical geometry. Let's imagine for beams and columns, lines, and for walls and slabs, surfaces. And this is covered in IFC. And the most important thing is to be able to define the connections between these elements. So is it a rigid connection? Is it a pin connection? And this, I think that in the end, it is a pretty general in IFC. And let's say, at least in my part now, I see more the challenge in Code Aster, being able, let's say, to implement from a general schema, let's say, to implement the scripts needed to have, let's say, this kind of analysis. And I think this can be something, let's say, very interesting, because for a lot of users of Code Aster, let's say, this easy manipulation of the connections is something that is missing. And so this is one of the things that say that I am excited to work towards, so that it can be a big flexibility and let's say bring it close to the commercial, let's say, packages.
I think the IFC format is highly hackable. It's basically just one documentation. Everything the IFC format is one documentation. To reply what Ryan was saying, we could, in theory, just fork the documentation and turn it into a wiki and start adding stuff. And you could perfectly well separate the original stuff with some entities that we would add, like custom ones. And so hacking it is
like a material, like a material having a GUI, right? There's nothing in the schema that material has a GUI. Like, it's like, hey, look, from now on in, materials are going to have GUIs between Blender and FreeCAD or Aster, right? We're just going to agree on.
Imagine we need a, for example, that's a discussion we already had, you and me. We need a component that is reusable. For example, a bathroom stall that you will repeat several times, and you don't have any structure in IFC to do that. Let's say we add an IFC reusable component, something like that, and it's just a matter of documenting it. You would have a documentation with all the entities, IFC wall, IFC column, and we would add a new one in our copy of the IFC documentation, and that's all that's needed, basically. And we would, and between us, agree to follow that documentation.
Yeah, and like the header of the IFC files, it says this is made with, under a certain MVD or whatever you would want to call it, right? It's like if your software is certified under this, you're basically going to round trip this exactly, right? Yeah. It's like, yeah.
So I want to just pitch in something here. The IFC standard is fairly open. they have meetings. I don't know how some of you guys probably know even more than I do about the standard, but every year there's a meeting discussing the standard and whether it needs to be revised and updated. And the guys seem to be pretty open. There's the Open BIM Alliance. HUK, the company I work in, is actually one of the founding members. And even at one point we had the annual IFC meeting in our office. And yeah, I mean, the guys, you know, if there's a good use case for adding something to the basic structure of it, I'm sure, you know, it will be discussed around a round table. It could be added into the proper standard as well.
That's for me, that is the problem. The discussion part of it, right? I would rather, this is my vote, and this is why I'm kind of excited about the OSArch meeting or group, is that I feel this is an opportunity to develop the standards in the trenches, to work out these workflows on actual projects, you know, and establish a workflow without trying to think about it too heavily, right? It's like when you have a committee and everything and you're trying to set, it just gets, it gets bogged down, and you add too much to it. You look at the IFC structure period, it's like too convoluted and too baroque, right? Because it was based on committees, it was based on, let's try to think of every little angle when we establish this structure. And I think that's a wrong way of going at it. I think the better way of developing a standard is out of the trenches, out of the workflow trenches. And, you know, if I'm the only one, you know, here that thinks that, that's fine. But, you know, I've been trying to push round tripping workflows for probably 8 years, 10 years. And Dion and Yorik, they can attest to that. I'm all over GitHub, and I've talked to, you know, I'm a super user. I'm not a programmer. I'm a super user. I know, you know, I've been around the language a long time, and I have a need, right? And I don't think Building Smart is addressing that need at all. And so and I've been trying to push this, and that's why I'm thinking this open source group here is an avenue to really hash that stuff out, to hash it out in like the actual workflow of a project. And please correct me if I'm wrong, if that's not a way of going about a standard, but, you know,
Ryan?
I think there's evidence of standards being developed that way out in, you know, the web world and everything, is that, you know, like Google creating Web3GL, you know, is that they actually dictated the standard because they were trying to create something that they could use.
It may be interesting to bring actually services like Speckle into the whole conversation. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Speckle, but all it tries to do is be a database, which is, you know, you can put anything you want into it to transfer data from one app or service into another one.
I just want to agree with Dimitar that the Building Smart guys are. It's a hard problem they're trying to solve, and I personally think they've done a good job so far. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are faults, but truth be told, I personally actually don't think there is much I would need to hack into the IFC schema. I think it's already extremely flexible to accommodate anything I need. The problems that you're facing, Ryan, I personally think is not so much with the schema, it's more a vendor implementation limitation.
Yes.
And some of the fault is in our programs like FreeCAD and Blender, and some of the fault is in programs like Revit. I don't personally think it's IFC's fault, but that said, I have participated in some of those IFC meetings, and I am aware that there is a culture there that, let's say it's divided half-half. I'm not sure what the exact proportion is, but I think half the people there do not see and do not ever expect IFC to be a round-trip format, and therefore their influence spills over into those sort of roundtable discussions. And that may be why because I know that's something you feel so passionate about. That's why you're feeling really disappointed, because it's true. There are people in Building Smart who are against it.
Yeah.
They see it as, you know, a static snapshot, which you then transfer, but you never round trip.
Correct. Which makes no sense to me. You know, it made no sense to me way back then. And the more I get into this, the more I realize that it's like, it's not a matter of tech, it's just a matter of will, right? It's very doable. It's very, very doable.
I'm sorry. When we're saying round tripping, what exactly are we meaning? Let's make the definition.
Where you lose no fidelity in something, whatever it is, you're round tripping, you know, simple extrusion.
Let's say.
Yeah, let's go very basic. You're round tripping a extrusion where it's created by a certain profile, extruded on a normal in a certain direction, and you can say you round trip that, and it always retains that underlying logic, right? Is that there's nothing lost there. So right now there's, you know, IFCs, there's a lot of fidelity that's lost, right? And I'm not arguing to let's try to figure a way out to round trip all the bells and whistles, all the BIM stuff out there, right? It's not. I'm just saying let's boil it down to a very simple language right now. Say just extrusions, or like how maybe a wall is created, whatever. Just start very simple, and agree that no round tripping in between various programs will not lose any fidelity whatsoever. Is that you can recreate your native file on your side in the same way that, you know, someone has created on the other side. You know, even if you don't include windows, if you don't include roofs at this point, you know, me and Yorik and I have developed a workflow where we can use simple extrusion and still get a big return on it, right? It's like we're creating 3D details, which if you look at one typical construction set, small scale details are probably, I don't know, a third of the construction set. So here we can, by just round tripping extrusions and materials, we're able to create a third of a construction set using our tool of choice. I could use Revit, Yorik could use FreeCAD, and Dion now excitingly could use Blender. We could work on a project, develop all our content, just like you do with code. You use your own IDE, you know, program. No one's dictating it, right? It's like we're all using our authoring program. We're still adding to the content that ultimately is, you know, could be used in a project. And so I've been trying to find out, you know, what is that workflow right now in our industry that we could wedge in there and make this demonstrate that there's some return on round tripping something simple. And I think that wedge right now is like creating these small or 3D details, you know, and I'm sure there's probably something equivalent in the structure component or whatever, but from my architectural point, this is a small little wedge where I think it would get round tripping work. And Yorik, I don't know what your opinion is of that. You know, you might have a different opinion on what that thing is, right? You could really latch onto and demonstrate round tripping.
Let's start. Let's say it's complicated because when we say round tripping, at what point do we consider it round tripping? Let's say when we hit like 90% fidelity of what we get back, or when it's only when it's 100%, and that's something we could maybe define. Like, what do we need? Let's say we need the geometry, we need all objects to be editable, but what does that mean? What do we need to be able to edit? Materials, that kind of stuff that are not really IFC concepts, more like usability concept. Basically, we should define what we need to edit for a certain object type. And that could be maybe a good base to start and make a table of applications and what we need to do. Let's say we have a wall, and what do we need to be able to do with that wall in FreeCAD, in Revit, and that might be a good starting point to define that kind of stuff. And what do we need with a column? like change the profile, move it, tie its extremity to something else, that kind of stuff. Maybe we could start something like that, like a round-tripping validation table or something like that.
Yeah. Dion, do you have any like hang-ups? You know what I would love to do is I would love to like bring a real project, you know, like an opening detail project, Yorik, you know, is that I felt those projects, right, we were making money on them, right? And we were still able to hash out our workflows, right?
Yeah.
Is that, you know, we have a certain problem, you know, we're just run through simple extrusions, we're running a problem, we address it then and there, and it's on a real paying project, you know. So I would get more excited about this and try to really proactively try to bring in like projects if I could see that, you know, Blender and FreeCAD, you could actually exchange certain content and not lose fidelity. Is that there's like some promise there, right? I feel if there were, it's a demonstrated promise, and we could bring a real world project into this and really show it to the world, you know. I don't know. I obviously I don't know the technical end of things, and Dion, you know, what we're asking might be too much of a problem.
Could I maybe come with a comment? I don't know if I'm getting through, so someone will need to nod, Ryan.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
I just don't know if the audio is coming through. It looks like it must be. My comment was simply that there's lots of different topics that we could talk about here, and round tripping, of course, is one of them, and there's a lot of other ones. And the great thing about having this group, of course, is that we can start finding out what our priorities are, and finding out what priorities are generally is also a question of what resources we have. So, I mean, one of the reasons I'm here, I can't offer to code and I can't offer to do very much, but I'm aware that in itself is a bit of a problem. This is a very small group of people, and any project we're talking about relies on about 4 people, and that in itself, to me, seems like a project for us as a community to work on, to build this community so that there are more people involved, because you need quite a lot of people involved before you get a couple of extra programmers in, right? And I mentioned that just to remind us that there are lots of different topics. Round tripping is one of them, and I don't know how setting up agendas for these discussions is a good way of how we want to do that. But I think it'd be really good to do that, because if we spend 10 minutes deciding that round tripping is a good idea, then it'd be really great if just a few people can sit down and write something about it and try and get someone to come back with a presentation. Maybe the discussion has got that far already. I know the Geometry Gym people from Revit, they have done round tripping with objects in Revit via IFC. So it's all possible. It's a question of resources and how many people would use it, and whether it makes sense trying to have a solution that can work for all types of software which use completely different ways of representing their data. So I guess there's 2 things I'm saying there. Let's remember we need to find a good way of catching a whole lot of different subjects, and let's remember to build community and not just focus on the many specific things that need to be done.
I think that's a good comment, actually. Well, we started actually doing that with Dimitar's ask for introductions, but I guess I would be curious to hear from other people what their projected passion is for this group, right? Why are you excited about this group? What would you like to see out of it?
Well, since I was talking, I'll keep going.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, just in basically, I want to, just like, I don't remember his name, but I think it was Dion, not sure. But I think Dion was talking about the fact, this whole business of whether it's a Revit user or an Allplan user or ArchiCAD or whatever it is, this idea that when you finish your project and you want to switch to a different software, or you don't have money for the licenses, this idea that you don't own your project is just fundamentally wrong in terms of open source philosophy. I mean, it's also wrong in terms of owning your artistic work and owning the effort that you put into it. So that's a big motivator for me. It just feels terrible for me every time I put a whole lot of effort. I'm sitting here with a big Revit project while I'm watching this, and I know that all of this effort is locked in by Autodesk. And if my firm ever decides to stop buying Autodesk licenses, Revit licenses, they've got a problem. So that's part of my background for being interested in it, and also just being able to help individuals who will never in their wildest dreams be able to buy licenses for expensive, high quality software. Making sure that they know about and have accessible, easy to use software like FreeCAD and Blender BIM and a few other things are heading in that direction.
So Yorik, what brought you here? What excites you?
Yorik, check your microphone.
Yes, sorry, it was muted. What did you ask me? Sorry.
I guess what would you like to see? What excites you about this community, right? What would you like to see come out of it?
Something like I think more people using open source software for BIM. That's one thing. Somehow we need to grow, and more people means more interest, means more developers, means all this grows. So I think this is excellent starting point, and I think we should start with all the things that are already happening, like information, putting stuff on wiki, informing stuff. I'm going to put more FreeCAD stuff on the OSArch wiki, and all things that make something grow. I think this is like important to put more focus, to have more people look at what we're doing here, and bring more efforts. The more people you have, the more developers enter the projects. That's really something you see happening. Like there is direct connection, and when you have a growing community, you have more developers coming inside the projects. So I think this is the way I see it. This is starting the way it should start. And now about, I like to play with the idea of hacking everything and stuff, but it's probably not a priority. And like everybody says here, we can do our own stuff with the standards the way they are. And certainly there is much more to do and stuff we can define between us without the need to explode the thing, which is a kind of hacking. If you think we're doing like the way we decide between us and we define rules, that's a kind of doing our own kitchen here. And that's something we should start doing, I think. And the fact that we now have like 2 big open source projects using IFC and doing BIM is tremendously interesting, because now we can like cross-link between each other without the need to use what bigger vendors decide to do or not to do. And everybody is here. We can just do it. And so that's something we should start doing.
I can vote. I can agree on that. it's really got me invigorated again about this potential is when there were 2 open source projects that, you know, are working on kind of IFC related content, right? Because that's really exciting. I really like the space in between. If there was like, you know, 2 bubbles, FreeCAD and Blender and well, Aster, I'm really excited about the in between space, right? That the exchanging of the content, that again, that developing content that's not reliant on a piece of software, right? That's so. Yeah. I would totally agree on that. Hey, Dion, why did you start this group? Thank you, by the way.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh, I was asking why you started this group. Or what would you like to get out of it?
Well, part of it is the same as Yorik, that the way an open source community grows is just to have more activities, and the more activities, the more people join, and the more people join, the more people test things for different purposes, and that's what improves features for. I mean, when I started Blender BIM, I didn't talk about it much, and then when I started talking about it, somebody used it to plug into Navisworks, for example, to create. Every day he was generating effectively a point cloud of where steamrollers were compacting a material to create a highway. And I thought, wow, you know, that's somebody has solved a real life problem with Blender BIM, and Blender BIM can't even you know, import a cube properly yet or something. And I would never have realized that there was actually a valid use case for it if I hadn't talked about it. And that was part of the reason I started this, so that people could say, hey, oh, FreeCAD can do that. Maybe I should play with it more. Or, hey, Blender can do that. Or, hey, I didn't know that there's Code Aster integration. I know a bit of Code Aster. Why don't we start plugging into that? So it's just sort of creating a conducive environment for people to realize what's possible. And as they poke at it, I know, like, you've been poking at it a long time, but other people with fresh use cases might find their wedge as well. Like Ioannis, he found his wedge in Code Aster, and that was great. But I'm not sure, Duncan, who said that we, you know, maybe we should figure out what types of wins we could solve, because there's quite a lot we could be working on, but we only have a limited number of programmers and a limited number of people who could test it on a particular project or run it. So maybe I guess that's something I want to see happen as well. So maybe if we could post, it's getting a bit late, it's almost 2 hours, so I'm not sure if we'll come to a conclusion this session, but maybe if we go post on the OSArch community forum, because that's why I started it, to start thinking about how more than just FreeCAD, more than just Blender, but as a, you know, as a big open source architecture community, how this could work. Maybe we can create a thread there and say, here's what I really want to tackle, what I want to solve. Like you mentioned annotations in your previous one, in the previous session. Now we're talking about round tripping, and but that's just one of many. So maybe we can list them all out, and if there's some easy wins, maybe we'll tackle those first, or if some people are better positioned, we'll tackle those. And maybe for the next session, we can present an actual use case problem that was solved of somebody's idea.
Yeah, I like that.
I was thinking, Duncan here again. Maybe if someone just starts a forum thread to look at that would of course be a great start, and maybe we can start looking at some sort of statement of intent, or whatever you call it, when a group of people with a similar intention get together, because that's the sort of thing the OSArch website can really help us with, is a platform where people can just find it when they're looking around the internet. I mean, if the different tools that are out there start pointing towards OSArch because it has a clear message about what we're trying to do, that in itself I think would help. Because at the moment I would suggest that the number of people is so low that a lot of it is going to be the tasks that people want to do, that people want to do for themselves. So we want to watch out about making a big wish list for us, and then trying to tell other people here, like Dion and Yorik, this is what we want you to do. That would be great, but it's probably not the way it's going to work. But does starting on a thread that looks at what our priorities are and what different people want to do, maybe it's a text version of a who am I and why am I here? It could be a way to start doing that, some sort of statement of intent.
Would you like to write it, Duncan? That would be great.
Well, I'd be very happy to do it after, because if you have a few weeks of a forum thread running with people talking about it, then I'd be happy to draft, to start drafting it as a document. The process itself is also a great way of telling people this is what we're thinking about. Does that fit with what you're thinking? But sure, I mean, if I've only just and another reason I think we want to start saying who we are is I'm pretty active in this, but I've just been very busy the last couple of weeks. So it's only 5 minutes before this started that I even discovered this meeting was here and finally got around to registering the website. So hopefully there's a lot of other people who are in a similar situation. So I don't even know where it is that I'd start. Oh, there's one called discussions. I will start a discussion thread and we'll see where it goes.
Sounds good. I'm excited. By the way, Ryan, I did have a second look at annotations after you were talking about that last time. I've just posted in the chat a little experiment I'm starting to work on to try to get better documentation and annotation out of Blender. And this is direct. Actually, forget blended. This is from IFC, so it should be able to plug into FreeCAD potentially.
Oh, nice. There you go. That's another low-hanging fruit right there.
I wouldn't, maybe not so low-hanging fruit. There's a huge amount of work which needs to be done, but it shows potential.
Again, it's very simple. Try to make it as simple as you can. I think that's the exciting part of it, is that there's no way, right, we can try to figure out everything, but there are just some wedges, like some low-hanging fruits that we can see a lot of return on projects, and I think it excites me, is that this forum, this group or whatever, can demonstrate that to the world, right?
Yeah,
we don't have to figure it all out in the beginning. We'll just demonstrate it as time goes on. Sorry,
yeah, just to follow up that thought, I think it's great to talk about all the upcoming potentials of transfer and the conversation, how it goes as established users per se. I mean, we are the experimenters, right? We are the guys that, whatever, just give it to me, I'll figure out how to work with it. But at the same time, if we want to try to grow this community, I think we need to just show some cool stuff, show like how people can use that already, what's possible around it. Because, as a person, when I first started using FreeCAD, I had no idea how advanced it is, and the stuff that I can do now in FreeCAD, I'm absolutely amazed at it. I mean, it's also up to me to actually post it out there so people can see it and understand that, these workflows, they're not just like a little toy box, you can get like legit work out of them. So I think I would encourage all of us to share more of our ideas and our workflows and our projects in a way to show the world what's possible already.
I would agree on that too. Is I don't think there's enough examples of like real firms or whatever using like FreeCAD well, Blender more so, but FreeCAD in particular.
Well, Blender not
big-
for architecture though. So even in that case.
Yeah, but I agree in general. Yes, I think more examples, because that's one thing I'm hesitant about. Is you know, I'd want to see, you know, some established work done to kind of so it makes you a little more comfortable jumping off and using it. You know, like even Yorik would even agree that, you know, he's hesitant in his practice to use FreeCAD in certain areas. You know, so there's definitely to see examples out there makes it a little more palatable and doable.
Yeah, Duncan here again, and I think that's where, like, the stuff that we can see on your website, Ryan, is really quite inspiring, because it shows people that you're being realistic, you're making projects work and earning some money, and including open source solutions as much as they can be included while you're still making money. And I think that's a really important message to send, that this is not a panacea. This is not a box that you can put Autodesk in and throw them out the window.
Yes, exactly.
This is going to help solve some problems, and the more we use it and the better it gets, the bigger the problems it can solve. Well, that was a messy sentence. I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. You can, you know, find that wedge and widen it over time. You're not going to do it wholesale. You're not going to be like, okay, let's just use FreeCAD for everything right now, or Blender or whatever. I don't think that's realistic. You know, I think you got to find those wedges, and I think that's
Totally
what
agree.
this community is about, is like finding those wedges and widening those wedges out, you know, and still make money. because if you're not making money, if you're not having a return on investment, no one's going to hire you to do it. You know, it's just that's the way it is.
But I actually want to mention, I completely agree exactly what you guys are saying, everything. I worked on a pretty complex project. I only wish actually I can share like the stuff that I've been doing over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, I cannot share any of it. But like one use case where I did like start using FreeCAD was to develop a very small chunk of a building, complex building, based on a round curve. It was a axon section chunk, right? And it was just so easy because it was based on a radius. Everything was based off of a radius. And with FreeCAD, having the capability to have everything related to like just one base curve made the whole process so easy. You know, I could just divide that same base curve. You know, I had like my floor profiles, my HVAC ducts, all my structure, everything was hooked up to like one base curve. And it was super powerful to display that. So yeah, there's probably a lot more of these like small little use cases.
Dimitar, out of curiosity, can you ask for permission from your company to not to share everything, but to put together a small presentation pack of what was achieved? And from my experience, I found that companies don't mind that at all, as long as you don't give too much away. And maybe that can be shared, because that would be fascinating.
I probably could try to rework some of those examples enough so they don't look like the actual projects, because a lot of those are under like really strict NDAs with the actual clients.
Yeah, I understand. I have the same problem.
Yep. Well, Dion, what's same question to you? Do you think land lease would be open to bringing a project to, you know, similar to kind of what I'm trying to do with open design, is develop everything in open. There's no secrets. Like, would land lease ever do that, you think? Something that crazy? That's the reason I started open design, because there's few firms that I would ever do that ever. So, but I'm curious if you could even like say, hey, I'm working on Blender BIM and I got this group of people that are trying to figure it out. It'd be awesome if you could actually put a real project out there, and I bet I could get these guys to work on it. You know, in a sense. I know that's a big argument to make with a big company, but just wanted to ask the question.
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that. But believe me, I'm listening to you. Let's just put it at that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, you know, whatever, talk to the guy you report to and say, hey, I got these guys and they're interested, and wouldn't it be great if we could actually develop a project out there? does Landlease have any open source projects themselves, or not necessarily, like a wiki house or whatever?
I think Lend-Lease does really huge projects. I think the minimum square meter is just big scale. They don't. I don't see
you
many.
can find those wedges in there, right? Like staircase, right? That staircase
Actually,
you worked on. Let's give me permission to work on this, like out in the open with the guys that we're trying to flush out a workflow here. Will you give me permission to do that?
Well, one thing is because Lend-Lease uses a lot of consultants. They are not an architecture firm, for example. So they will hire a consultant to do all of the MEP and the structural and the architectural work. So the way Lend-Lease might use a BIM program is a completely different use case to the way Dimitar and HOK might use a BIM program. Like we would use that BIM program for clash detection and BCF issue reviewing and cutting big sections and auditing BIM data and checking schedules. And in those cases, I am certainly finding wedges. There are and that's why I build the things I build in Blender BIM, because I am actually solving real problems in Lend-Lease. Unfortunately, not sure how much I can share, but I think I will try to share some more and definitely do more recordings. I did one recently of a section plane feature. I might do some more about some of the more auditing features.
Well, no, yeah, that'd be awesome. Again, like harking back to demonstrating the potential with real projects, like Duncan said. That's what I'm trying to do with opening design, is that we're working on these projects out in the open. We're trying to figure out this stuff and demonstrating it versus making it glossy. Here's the final project. This is what you could do. Yeah, I want to actually demonstrate who are the people working on this, what's the conversations they're having, what are the problems. I can see it. I can see all the pain in real time that they're having. Oh, I can jump in and answer that question. It's that the workflow is out there. So I think what excites me is to actually have more projects like that, the potential. Whether Lend-Lease wants to bring something in and we can help, or whatever. It's like I think real projects where you're in the trenches, showing this off to people and showing our blood as we're trying to figure it out.
I'm just looking at the chat window here because maybe they don't have mics. Cyril is talking about making a project. In this room right now, we have architects, we have structural engineers, we have HVAC engineers. He's looking for an electrical engineer, and he says we could do a small project to build and describe a workflow. I think that's fascinating. I would love to do that, kind of like how the Blender Foundation had an open movie. Like we should do a small building. We just need.
I would totally agree. I would love it to be a paying project, though. I don't think it should be a hypothetical project, right? I think
that's the tricky one.
Well, it's totally doable. I think a hypothetical project fine, but I feel you're only going to get people's attention on it, right? If there's actually money involved and people can actually concentrate on it. So I think that's a totally great idea. I think we should try to find a paying project. And if one comes by my way, I'd love to put it out there as well. Obviously we're in kind of a funk right now, but yeah, I think whoever said that in chat, I agree that was a great idea.
Okay, given that we're now approaching 2 hours, can I recommend that we wrap this up? Petrish is a mechanical engineer, company making automatic doors, working together with architects. So, this is great. Like, we have a lot of really skilled people in the room. Can I recommend that we continue this on the forums to give also people who don't have a chance to join us on the C meeting to join us well? And we talk about two things. The first is kind of what what we want to achieve out of this, if there are any practical problems and use cases we can solve. And maybe Duncan can take the lead on that to try and moderate it and come up with a practical a statement or a conclusion to that. And the second would be if we could work out who is willing to be part of this sort of open design project, and try to work out how we actually get that first little piece of commercial work.
Yeah, for sure.
And maybe Ryan, since you have the most experience in actually doing commercial work with open source software, would you like to take the lead on that one?
Yeah, I've been trying to find work or continue to find work, for the last 8 years, and that's part of owning a firm, or it's just finding that next job. So, I've worked with Yorik many, many years. There's a number of other people too who work with Lewis, who's developed his own, finite structural program. So yes, I totally agree. I will try to bring a project in here if I can. But likewise, I'll work on a project too that's out there as well. So no, I'm excited. Very cool, Dion. Thank you for organizing this.
Just throwing that out there, we are in sort of a world crisis at the moment. It's probably a little bit too early to think what the next steps would be needed in regards to buildings. Hospitals, I think maybe a good one, or like healthcare facilities, rehabilitation facilities, but like some sort of open design that addresses like that sort of issue is something that like starts to interest me. I know, again, it's probably a little bit too early to think about all these things, especially like we still don't know what the big impact is, but I feel like that's would be a good way to sort of give to the world at the moment.
Yeah.
Duncan here again. I've also been thinking that just like Habitat for Humanity, if some of you guys know them, I mean, they also need people to design their buildings, and I'm sure there are lots of NGOs at the moment who would love a bit of technical help. I'm full-time plus, so I can't really do anything about that. But the people who do have some time, that might be a way of building some relationships for organizations who would never turn it into a paying project, because we shouldn't be doing free work. But if we can find some groups who would never have the money to pay for it, then maybe a project for them would be something some people would be willing to put some free time into.
I fully support that, Duncan. That's a great idea, personally.
Anyway, I've got to run, otherwise I'm just going to get killed by my project. We'll talk to you all again sometime soon.
Awesome, Duncan. Thanks.
Thank you. Ioannis, are you still recording?
Yes, still recording.
Okay, and I think we'll wrap up today's session. I'll create a couple threads on the forum, or maybe Ryan, you can start one. I'll start one. I'll start the other one for Duncan on Duncan's behalf, because he's busy right now. And Ioannis, if you can send me the recording, I will upload it and share it as usual.
Okay, yes, for sure.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks.
Have a good
Then,
night.
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.